"You don't need to come inside, Emily. He doesn't want to see you." That's what my mother said before the door clicked shut. The sound was small, but it carried the kind of finality that only a mother's rejection can hold. I stood there for a moment, the pie box in my hands growing colder against my palms. The porch light above her head flickered once, throwing a yellow glow across the cracked concrete steps. I could see my reflection in the glass door, small, waiting, foolish. The pumpkin pie had still been warm when I left my apartment. I'd made it from scratch, thinking it might make things easier, that maybe she'd smile and say it was nice of me to drop by. But her face didn't change. She looked through me like I was another unwanted visitor selling something she didn't need. I tried to swallow the lump in my throat. "Mom, I just wanted to see him," I said quietly. "He's tired," she replied, hand tightening around the edge of the door. "And he asked for peace tonight. You showing up like this, it's not helping." The words were soft but sharp, shaped to cut without raising her voice. That was her way. I could hear faint laughter inside, my sister's voice, the clinking of glasses. They were having dinner without me again. I knew that sound too well. Family gatherings that somehow always forgot I existed. I nodded once, pretending it didn't hurt. "Okay," I said. "I won't stay." She didn't say goodbye. The door shut fully this time, and the porch light blinked out altogether. For a second, the world went dark. I stood there holding that pie like a fool on Halloween night, the street behind me full of children in costumes running from house to house. Their laughter floated through the cold air, mixing with the rustle of dry leaves. It felt like another world, one that didn't belong to me. I'd spent so many years trying to be part of this family, trying to earn a space that was never mine. My name is Emily Rashford. I'm 34, a nurse at Portland General. I live alone in a small apartment near the river. I guess I've always believed that if I kept showing up, birthdays, holidays, small visits like this one, eventually they'd let me back in. But it never happens. My mother doesn't hate me. She just doesn't see me. I walked down the steps slowly, balancing the pie like it mattered. I didn't want to drop it. That would feel too symbolic. Another thing I couldn't hold on to. The gravel crunched under my shoes as I reached the sidewalk. My breath hung in front of me in the cold. For a moment I thought about turning back. Maybe I could knock again, pretend I forgot something. But I knew she wouldn't open the door. My mother never changed her mind. Not for me. As I started walking toward my car, I caught sight of the living room window. Through the sheer curtains, I could see my sister Clara pouring wine. She was laughing, her hand brushing her husband's arm. They looked perfect, like they always did, the family my mother liked to show off. I turned away before the bitterness reached my face. I set the pie on the front seat beside me and started the car. The heater took its time. My hands were trembling a little, not from cold, but from that familiar ache of being reminded that I didn't belong. Sometimes people think rejection gets easier with time, but it doesn't. It just gets quieter. You stop crying, you stop explaining, you just accept that the door closes a little faster each year. I pulled out of the driveway, headlights sweeping across the mailbox with our family name carved into it. Rashford. The letters fading, half covered in vines. It used to make me proud. Now it felt like someone else's story. Halfway down the street, I saw an old man standing under the flickering street lamp. He wore a dark coat and leaned on a cane. I slowed down, thinking he might need help crossing. When he turned toward me, the light caught his face, and my breath caught too. It was my grandfather. He looked older, frailer than I remembered, but his eyes, those sharp gray eyes, were the same. I hadn't seen him in years. We were told he'd moved away, that he didn't want visitors. My mother said he liked his privacy. I rolled down the window, my voice uncertain. "Grandpa?" He nodded slowly, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. "Emily," he said, as if testing the sound. "You've grown up well." I parked by the curb and got out. "What are you doing here? I thought—" "I know what you thought." He studied me, eyes tracing every line of disbelief on my face. "Your mother told me you stopped writing, that you didn't want me in your life." I stared at him, the words sinking like stones. That's not true. He nodded again, eyes softening. I figured as much. That's why I came. He took a step closer, his cane tapping the pavement. Your mother lied to me about you. The air felt heavier then. Behind me, the house glowed warm through the curtains, laughter spilling into the night like an old wound opening again. I didn't know what to say, only that the truth was finally breathing between us after years of silence. Maybe you've been shut out by your own family, too, left standing on a porch with something warm in your hands and nowhere to put it. If so, you'll understand what I did next. And if this moment feels too familiar, stay with me. You might want to hear how this story turns. I used to think every family had a favorite child, but in mine, it wasn't a secret. My mother made sure of that. Clara's always been special, she used to say. The same way people talk about a gift they don't deserve. She'd say it at the dinner table, at church, at neighborhood gatherings, always within earshot, like she wanted me to remember my place. And I did. I learned early to stay quiet and help clean up while Clara laughed in the living room, soaking up every compliment like sunlight. My father never said much. He'd sit in his recliner after work, staring at the TV with his drink, pretending not to notice the imbalance in the air. He loved us both, I think, but he didn't have the strength to step between us. I used to hope he would, that maybe one night he'd speak up when Mom dismissed me for not dressing like Clara or for choosing nursing over business school. But his silence became its own answer. When I finished nursing school, I sent them money every month, not because they asked, but because I thought it might show them I cared. Mom would say, "You shouldn't waste your savings on us." But she'd cash the checks anyway. There was never a thank you card. I told myself she just forgot, but deep down I knew gratitude wasn't part of her vocabulary. Clara, meanwhile, married a man named Daniel who worked in real estate. My mother called their wedding the event of the year, even though I was the one who helped pay for the floral arrangements when Clara's card declined. She never mentioned that to anyone. Instead, she smiled for photos while I stood behind her, adjusting her veil. Every time the camera flashed, I felt myself fading a little more from the family picture. After my father passed, I thought things might change. I drove down for the funeral, brought food, paid the chapel fees, did all the quiet things no one notices. But during the service, Mom clung to Clara's arm like she was the only one who had lost a parent. When I tried to comfort her, she said softly, "You always make everything about yourself, Emily." That line stayed with me more than the priest's prayer. Years went by, and I stopped expecting affection. I just sent Christmas cards, small gifts, polite updates about work. She never responded, but I kept doing it because stopping felt like giving up on being her daughter. I even visited when Clara had her first baby, thinking maybe being an aunt would finally make me part of something. But when I arrived with a small silver bracelet for the newborn, Mom met me at the door and whispered, "Don't wake the baby. Clara's resting." I never saw the baby that day. Sometimes I wonder if my mother ever noticed how far I drove for those short visits, how often I came bearing something in my hands, always trying to offer proof of love. It was like knocking on a locked door over and over, waiting for someone to remember I was family. The truth is, I wasn't invisible to her. I was useful. I fixed things, made calls, paid bills when she said the accounts were tight. Once, when her car broke down, she called me from the side of the road. I left work early, got it towed, paid for the repairs. When I handed her the keys, she said, "Clara's husband would have gotten us a better deal." That was all. I think that's when something in me began to settle. Not in defeat, but in understanding. My mother didn't love me less. She loved control more. Clara fit the picture she wanted to show the world, and I didn't. It wasn't personal anymore. It was just how she built her world. Last year, I called her after months of silence. I told her I was thinking of visiting. There was a long pause before she said, "You really don't have to come all this way. Everyone knows you moved away for good." Her tone was casual, almost cheerful, but that sentence made the room tilt. I asked, "Everyone?" She said, "Well, yes. I told the neighbors you started a new life out there. It's easier than explaining why you never come around. I remember sitting there, phone pressed to my ear, the hum of my refrigerator filling the silence. My heart didn't race. It didn't even ache. I just felt still, like the truth had finally caught up to what I already knew. She'd erased me long before she said it aloud. I didn't argue. I only said, I understand. Then I hung up. That night, I stood by the window, watching the city lights blur across the water. It was strange, how peace and grief can look the same from a distance. I thought about how easy it is for some people to rewrite history when they hold the pen. But I also knew something she didn't. She might have erased me in words, but I was still here, breathing, living, remembering. And sometimes, memory is the sharpest kind of revenge. Emily, you can't sit there. That's Grandpa's chair. Mom said it like she always did. Flat, automatic, not even looking at me as she poured herself a glass of wine. The dining room smelled like roasted chicken and lemon polish. The same Sunday routine we'd followed since I was a kid. Clara's laughter carried from the kitchen, light and confident, like the house itself bent toward her voice. I pulled out the smaller chair by the corner, the one that always wobbled, and took my place without a word. Dinner was already halfway done. Clara was telling a story about Daniel closing some big real estate deal, and everyone was listening like it was gospel. He's already thinking about expanding, she said, her ring glinting under the chandelier. Mom smiled wide, her hand resting over Clara's. That's what happens when you marry a man with ambition. She didn't say it to hurt me, but it landed anyway. I cut my chicken slowly, pretending I didn't hear. I'd worked a double shift that weekend, 12 hours on my feet at the hospital, helping a patient through cardiac rehab. But stories like that didn't fit in this room. Every time I tried to share one, it fell flat, like a song played to deaf ears. So, Emily, Clara said suddenly, sipping her wine with a little smirk, are you still doing those overnight nurse shifts? That must be exhausting. I looked up. It can be, I said, but I like helping people. It's steady work. Clara leaned back. I don't know how you do it. I couldn't handle that much stress for so little pay. Mom laughed softly. Not out of cruelty, but out of habit. Not everyone can be in business, sweetheart. Some of us are better suited for caring roles. That pause, that tiny, deliberate pause, told me exactly what she meant. I smiled faintly and set down my fork. You're right, I said. Some people care, and some just talk about it. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Clara blinked. Mom looked down, and Daniel cleared his throat. I didn't say another word. It always amazed me how a simple meal could feel like a performance. Every dish in its place, every story rehearsed, every laugh timed. My job was just to listen, nod, and blend into the furniture. And yet, the one chair that mattered stayed empty. Grandpa's chair. It sat at the head of the table like a ghost, the cushion still firm, the place untouched. No one spoke about why he stopped coming. Mom said he was resting, and Clara said he was probably happier away from all this drama. I used to believe them. But as I grew older, I started to notice how their words bent around the truth. Grandpa had been quiet, but not cruel. He used to call me his steady girl, said I reminded him of my grandmother, patient and stubborn in equal parts. He was the only one who asked about my classes, who remembered my favorite books. Then one day he was just gone. No goodbye, no explanation, just an empty chair and Mom's word that he needed space. Clara passed the mashed potatoes across the table. Do you ever hear from him? She asked, feigning casual curiosity. Mom shook her head. No, you know how your grandfather is. Private man. He made his choices. Something in her tone felt rehearsed. I caught it in the way she avoided my eyes, how her hand tightened around the wine stem. I didn't push it, not then. But it stayed with me. Maybe he'll come around for Thanksgiving, I said, testing the waters. Clara snorted softly. You know he won't. He already left everything to Mom when he passed. For a moment, I couldn't speak. When he passed? I repeated, trying to sound calm. Clara nodded, as if it were common knowledge. Didn't you know? Mom said he handled everything before he, well, you know. I looked at my mother. Her fork froze midair, eyes flicking up for half a second before she forced a smile. Yes, he did. A long time ago. But I saw it. The flicker of panic, the lie pressed behind her teeth. She didn't expect Clara to say that out loud. The room suddenly felt too bright. I could hear the faint ticking of the wall clock, the scrape of silverware, the sound of my own breathing. I stared at the empty chair at the head of the table and thought about the man who used to sit there, how he'd squeeze my hand when Mom's words got too sharp. Something in my chest tightened. If Grandpa was really gone, why hadn't anyone told me? And if he wasn't, what were they hiding? I didn't ask. Not yet. I just smiled faintly and reached for my glass. Then I guess the chair can stay empty, I said quietly. Seems fitting. No one replied. Dinner went on, the conversation shifting to vacation plans and baby names. But I barely heard a word. All I could think about was my mother's face, the way her eyes darted when she lied, the tremor in her hand that she tried to hide. When I finally stood to leave, she kissed my cheek and said, "Drive safe, honey." Her voice was smooth again, practiced, but as I stepped toward the door, I looked back at that chair one last time. I don't know why, but it felt like it was waiting. The knock came just as I was finishing my tea. It was late afternoon, quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the soft drizzle outside. I wasn't expecting anyone, and no one ever visited without calling first. I hesitated, thinking maybe it was a delivery. But then the knock came again, slow, steady, and patient. Something about it felt familiar, like it belonged to another time in my life. When I opened the door, I froze. There he was, my grandfather. He stood on the porch in a dark coat, rain clinging to his shoulders, his cane pressed into the wood. His face looked older, more fragile, but his eyes were still the same, gray, sharp, and quietly knowing. For a second, I couldn't move. All I could do was stare at the man I'd been told was gone. "Grandpa?" My voice came out small, almost unsure. He nodded once. "You look just like her," he said softly. "Your grandmother." I felt something twist inside me, grief, shock, maybe even anger. "You're alive." He let out a breath, half a sigh. "So it seems." Then looking at me carefully, he added, "I wasn't sure you'd open the door." "I almost didn't," I said, stepping aside to let him in. "Come in before you catch a cold." He shuffled past me, his cane tapping the floor. My apartment suddenly felt too small for both of us. He took off his hat, set it on the counter, and looked around like he was measuring the years we'd lost. "I tried to visit once," he said, lowering himself onto the couch. "Your mother told me you were too busy, that you'd moved on." I sat across from him, my hands folded tightly in my lap. "She said you moved away, that you wanted to be alone." He smiled faintly, but there was no humor in it. "Seems we were both given stories to keep us apart." The words hung in the air. I didn't know what to say. For so long, I'd believed he'd abandoned us. I'd cried about it as a teenager, angry that he'd never written back. And now here he was, flesh and bone, staring at me with quiet sadness. "I used to send you letters," I said quietly. "Every birthday." He looked up at me then, eyes softening. "I know. I never got them until last year." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "I asked your mother why you stopped writing. She said you'd moved away, that you didn't want contact. I didn't question it at first. She's my daughter. I thought she'd tell me the truth." I leaned back, my pulse quickening. "She said the same about you." He nodded slowly. "I figured as much. That's why I left the old house. I wanted to see who would remember me if I disappeared." He paused, studying my face. "You were the only one who did." The rain outside grew heavier, beating softly against the window. I stared at him, trying to process it all. My mother, the same woman who told me Grandpa had passed, had been lying for years. I should have felt rage, but what I felt instead was a hollow ache, the kind that comes when you realize the truth has been sitting quietly behind you all along. "Why now?" I asked. "Why come to me?" He rubbed his thumb along the curve of his cane, thinking, "Because I need to know what else she's been hiding. And because I trust you, Emily." Hearing my name from him after all these years nearly broke me. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "She won't take this well if she finds out we've spoken." "I'm counting on that," he said, his tone calm, almost amused. "I've spent too long letting her handle everything. My accounts, my house, my affairs. I signed papers I didn't read. And now, when I ask about them, she gets nervous." That word, nervous, caught me off guard. My mother was many things, but never nervous. She lived on control. It was her oxygen. "Do you think she's stealing from you?" He looked at me with a weary half-smile. "I think she's rewritten the truth so many times she doesn't remember what it used to be." I sat back, letting the silence stretch. The sound of rain filled the space between us. 1,000 memories flashed through my mind. Mom's careful half-truths, her quick deflections whenever Grandpa's name came up, the missing photographs from the hallway wall. It all connected now, piece by piece. He leaned forward, voice lower, steady. "Can you help me find out what your mother's been hiding?" I met his eyes. In them, I saw the man who once carried me on his shoulders, who taught me how to tie knots in the backyard. But I also saw something else. Resolve. The same kind that had been growing quietly inside me ever since that door slammed in my face. I didn't answer right away. I just nodded once, slowly, because deep down I already knew. Whatever this truth was, it had been waiting for me all along. When my grandfather handed me the envelope, he didn't say much. Just, "I think this belongs to you." His tone was even, almost too calm, but the look in his eyes told me he already knew what I was about to find inside. The paper felt old, soft at the edges, folded more times than necessary, like someone had opened it, closed it, and hidden it away again. I sat down at the small kitchen table, my hands trembling before I even broke the seal. The rain outside had stopped, leaving that strange quiet that comes after a storm. I unfolded the paper slowly. It was a trust account statement. My name was printed neatly at the top, Emily Rashford, beneficiary. The numbers blurred for a moment before they sank in. Tens of thousands of dollars, set aside when I was 16. The date on the first deposit matched the year I left for nursing school. I looked up at him, my voice barely steady. "This can't be right. I never had anything like this." He nodded. "I know. That's what bothered me." "She told me there wasn't anything left after Dad's medical bills," I said quietly. "That you'd already divided things between her and Clara." He leaned back, his cane resting against the chair. "That's what she wanted you to believe. I set this up after your grandmother passed, for both girls. Equal shares." The words sank in like slow poison. Equal shares. I pressed the paper flat on the table, smoothing it with my palm. "And Clara?" "She took hers years ago," he said. "Your mother helped her withdraw it when she got married." I stared at the page again. Every number, every date felt like another bruise. All those years I'd worked extra shifts, skipping dinners, sending money home when Mom said she was short on cash. I used to think I was helping. Now I realize she was helping herself. I folded the statement carefully and placed it back in the envelope. "Why are you showing me this now?" He didn't hesitate. "Because I need someone honest. And because you deserve to know what she's done." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I could feel my heart beating in my throat, not from anger, not yet, but from the weight of finally knowing. The truth didn't shout, it whispered, and it whispered all the missing years back to me. "She told me you never trusted me," I said softly. "That's why you left her everything." He looked down at his hands, the veins thin and blue. "I trusted her to take care of what I left. I didn't expect her to rewrite the story." I sat back and exhaled. My mother had lied about him, about the inheritance, about the money, and she had done it all with that same calm smile she used when she'd say, "You worry too much, Emily." I almost laughed, but it came out as a sigh. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. "I can't change what she's done, but I can make sure she doesn't do it again." I nodded slowly. The rage I expected never came. Instead, a strange calm settled in, the kind that comes when you finally stop trying to please someone who was never proud of you. "I'm not going to confront her yet," I said. "Not until I understand everything." He gave a faint smile. "That's what I hoped you'd say." We talked for another hour. He told me about the small farm he still owned on the outskirts of town, how he'd kept to himself, watching from a distance. He said my mother stopped visiting years ago, except when she needed signatures or favors. "She thinks kindness is weakness," he said quietly. "She doesn't realize it's the only thing that outlives her lies." When he left, the envelope was still in my hand. I stood at the door and watched him walk down the narrow path, his cane steady against the gravel. I felt something shift inside me. Not a fire, but a slow ignition. The kind that doesn't flare up. It stays, waiting for the right moment to burn. That night, I sat on my couch with the envelope in front of me. I opened it again, not to reread the statement, but to feel the weight of it. Proof. It wasn't just about money. It was about the years she'd stolen by making me feel small, helpless, grateful for scraps that were never hers to give. I thought about how many times she'd said, "You should be thankful, Emily. Not everyone gets what you have." I used to believe her. Now, I realized she'd been keeping my own inheritance while making me apologize for existing. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I didn't want revenge that screamed. I wanted the kind that stood quietly in a room full of lies, the kind that didn't need to explain itself. Have you ever realized someone's been lying to you for years, and they still smile like nothing happened? It's a strange kind of clarity, painful, but freeing. I folded the paper one last time, slid it back into its envelope, and tucked it into my coat pocket. Then I looked at my phone. There was a group text from Mom, family dinner next weekend at her house. The message was casual, cheerful, like she hadn't stolen years from me. I typed back a short reply, "I'll be there." And as I hit send, I smiled for the first time that night. Not because I forgave her, but because I finally knew what she feared most, the truth walking calmly through her door. When I pulled up to my mother's house, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. It wasn't fear. It was something heavier, a kind of quiet reckoning that comes when you finally stop pretending. My grandfather sat beside me in the passenger seat, silent but alert. The last time he'd stood on this porch, she'd told him I wanted nothing to do with him. Now we were walking up together side by side, and the lie had nowhere left to hide. I rang the doorbell once. The sound echoed faintly inside. Through the frosted glass, I could see movement, her shadow, quick and cautious. The door opened just a crack, enough for her to see him, and her expression froze like wet cement. "Dad," she said, voice catching somewhere between shock and guilt. Then she smiled too fast, too wide. "Well, this is a surprise." Her tone was sugary, but her hands gripped the edge of the door. She wasn't glad to see him. She was terrified. Grandpa leaned lightly on his cane, his voice steady. "You didn't expect me, did you?" She laughed once, high and thin. "Of course not. You didn't say you were coming. You could have called. Emily, sweetheart, why didn't you tell me?" I looked straight at her. "I thought you already knew I talked to him." Her eyes flickered, just for a second, before the mask came back. "Well, come in then," she said quickly. "It's chilly out. Clara and Daniel just got here too." The warmth inside felt fake, like someone had turned up the heat just to make the air uncomfortable. The dining table was already set, silver cutlery, candles, all her little performances lined up in perfect order. Clara stood near the kitchen island, her posture stiff, pretending to scroll her phone. When she saw us, her face drained of color. Grandpa, she stammered, we didn't know you were. He interrupted gently. Alive? Clara's mouth opened, then closed. She set her phone down and forced a laugh that didn't land anywhere near her eyes. Of course we knew, we just thought you were taking time for yourself. Mom stepped between us, her voice tight but polished. You know how families are, misunderstandings. But what matters is that we're all here now. Grandpa walked slowly to his old chair at the head of the table, the same one that had sat empty for years. He pulled it out without asking and sat down. The sound of the chair legs scraping against the floor made Mom flinch. She poured him water like she was hosting a guest she wanted gone. You should have told me, Dad. I would have made something special. I didn't come for the food, he said quietly. I came for the truth. The silence that followed was thick enough to chew. Clara busied herself with napkins. Daniel cleared his throat and asked me about work, pretending not to notice the tension. I gave short answers, all the while watching my mother's face. She couldn't meet my eyes. Halfway through dinner, Grandpa turned to her and said, I found something you forgot to mention. Emily's trust account. Her fork froze midair. Oh, that, she said lightly. It was a misunderstanding. I was managing things until she was ready. I was ready 15 years ago, I said. Her eyes flashed at me, sharp and warning. We can discuss this privately, Emily. No, Grandpa said. We'll discuss it here. For the first time she looked small, her posture sank, her voice dropping into that familiar mix of defensiveness and charm. You don't understand, Dad. You were sick. Things were chaotic. I just handled it the best I could. He shook his head slowly. You handled it for yourself. I watched her mouth tighten, the corners twitching in anger she couldn't show in front of him. She reached for her glass, her hand trembling slightly. Let's not make this dramatic, she said, forcing a smile. It's family. We can fix this quietly. That was always her answer. Fix it quietly. Keep the surface smooth. Pretend nothing happened. But now the surface was cracking, and everyone could hear it. Clara pushed her plate away and stood. I didn't know about any of this, she said, her voice small. I could tell she was lying, or maybe trying to believe she hadn't known enough to feel guilty. I looked at her calmly. You don't have to explain, Clara. You already got your share. The color returned to her face all at once, bright and defensive. That's not fair. Neither is theft, I said quietly. Grandpa set his napkin down, finished his water, and looked straight at my mother. You've got one more chance to tell me what else you've taken. She smiled thinly, the kind of smile that hides panic behind good manners. You're tired, Dad. Let's talk tomorrow. He didn't respond. He just stared at her until the silence became unbearable. When I stood to leave, she followed me to the doorway. Her voice dropped low, sharp like a blade sliding between ribs. He doesn't know what he's doing, she whispered. Don't ruin this. I turned to her, meeting her eyes for the first time all evening. He knows exactly what he's doing, I said. So do I. And I walked out before she could say another word. After dinner, the house grew still in that heavy way it does when everyone's pretending to be fine. My mother cleared the plates with mechanical grace, smiling just enough to keep the air polite. Clara talked about her kids again, her voice light and effortless, while I sat across from my grandfather, watching his eyes. He hadn't eaten much. He only moved food around his plate like someone trying to keep up appearances. I noticed his gaze drift toward the counter, where my mother stood signing a stack of checks. Her pen moved with the same ease I remembered, smooth, confident, rehearsed. She didn't glance up once. Grandpa's hand trembled slightly where it rested on his cane, a faint motion that said more than words ever could. Dad, these are just routine bills, she said without looking back. I've been handling them for years. His voice was soft, but it cut through the room. I can see that. She turned, still smiling. You don't need to worry yourself. You've done enough. Let me take care of things. He gave a quiet nod and leaned back, his eyes never leaving her hands. I could tell he was studying every movement, every flourish of her pen. Clara started to say something about a new car, trying to fill the silence, but it only made the air tighter. I couldn't stop watching my mother either. There was something about the way she moved, like someone signing their name to a truth they didn't believe in. When she finally gathered the papers and disappeared into her office, Grandpa exhaled slowly. His knuckles were white around the cane. I leaned toward him. "Are you okay?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes followed the closed door, then returned to me with a quiet, hollow calm. "She forged my signature last year." I blinked, not sure I'd heard him right. "What?" He nodded once. "I recognized it just now. The curl at the end of the R, the way she loops the D. I taught her to write like that when she was a child. Now she uses it to take from me." For a moment, all I could hear was the faint tick of the clock on the wall. My throat tightened. "You're sure?" His expression didn't change. "I know my own hand. I also know hers." I felt my pulse quicken, a dull ache spreading through my chest. She'd already lied about the trust account. Now this. "What did she sign?" He hesitated, his jaw tensing. "Withdrawal slips, property documents, maybe more." I stopped asking after she told me I was remembering wrong. That line hit me harder than anything else. I'd heard her use it too. That soft, dismissive tone she reserved for anyone who questioned her. "You're remembering wrong, Emily." It used to make me doubt myself. Hearing him say it made something inside me harden. I lowered my voice. "Why didn't you report it?" He smiled faintly, not the kind that reaches the eyes. "Because she's my daughter. You don't call the police on your child. You just hope they stop before they ruin themselves." The way he said it made my chest ache. I'd spent years wanting my mother's approval, and here was the man she came from, sitting in the same pain I'd lived in all my life. Different shape, same silence. I looked at the doorway again. I could still hear her faint voice in the other room, probably talking to Clara, pretending nothing was wrong. I'd seen that act too many times to mistake it for innocence. "She's not going to stop," I said quietly. "Not until someone makes her." He met my eyes then, steady and tired. "And who's going to do that?" I didn't have an answer. Not one I could say out loud yet, but the thought formed anyway. Sharp, clear, impossible to ignore. I stood and began clearing the table. My hands were steady, but inside, I could feel the shift. The space between anger and action is small, and I just crossed it without realizing. When I came back with a damp towel, Grandpa was still sitting there, his gaze fixed on nothing. I placed my hand on his shoulder. "You're not alone in this," I said softly. He looked up at me, and for a moment, the old strength in his eyes returned. "Be careful, Emily. She's clever." "I know," I said, "but so am I." He gave a small nod, like he believed me, but wished he didn't have to. The kind of nod that comes from a man who's seen too much to hope easily. The house had gone quiet again, too quiet. I heard the faint click of her office door closing, the shuffle of papers, the whisper of a drawer sliding shut. I glanced toward the hallway and felt something cold settle in my chest. She thought our secrets were safe. She thought I'd keep playing the obedient daughter. But I'd seen too, much now, enough to know that silence wasn't love. It was permission. And I was done giving it. The house felt different at night, quieter, heavier, the kind of silence that makes you feel like the walls are listening. My mother had gone to bed hours ago, and the only light came from the hall lamp she always left on, just enough to guide her lies safely through the dark. I stood outside her study with my heart pounding against my ribs, my hand hovering over the brass handle. I knew if I opened that door, nothing would ever be the same again. I turned the knob slowly. It gave way without a sound. The smell of the old paper and perfume drifted out, sharp and familiar. Her desk sat in the middle of the room, perfectly organized. Every pen aligned, every document stacked. She liked control. Even in chaos, she built order to hide it. I closed the door behind me and moved quietly toward the desk. The drawer on the right had always been locked when I lived here. Now, it slid open with a soft click. Inside were bank statements, property papers, and envelopes addressed to her lawyer. My fingers trembled as I sifted through them until I found one marked Estate Revision, Personal Copy. I unfolded the document and stared at the title across the top. Last Will and Testament of Charles F. Rashford. My grandfather's name. My breath caught. The first few lines looked normal. His signature at the bottom looked real. But then I saw it. The date. 2 years after his supposed death. The ink was darker, fresher. I scanned down to the beneficiaries, reading each line twice to make sure my eyes weren't lying. My name wasn't there. It had been replaced with one word: removed. I read it again and again, the word growing heavier each time. Removed. Like I'd never existed. Like every letter I wrote, every visit, every sacrifice had been erased with a single pen stroke. My chest burned. I flipped to the second page and froze when I saw the witness signature. Daniel Whitman, Clara's husband, the family lawyer. Of course. I heard the faint hum of the refrigerator down the hall, the tick of the wall clock, and my mother's soft footsteps above me. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the paper, feeling my pulse in my throat. I wasn't just cut out. I was buried alive in her story, rewritten into nothing. I whispered to myself, she really did it. Every piece of evidence sat in my hands, still warm from the drawer. My mother had used the one person she could trust, her son-in-law, to forge an alternate will, one that turned her theft into legality. She must have thought Grandpa would never find out, that no one would question her, that I'd stay silent forever. I looked at the framed family photo on her desk, all of us smiling, the perfect lie in glass. I wanted to smash it, but I didn't. Rage wasn't power, proof was. I took my phone out, turned off the flash, and began taking pictures. Every page, every date, every signature. My hands steadied the longer I worked. The fear drained away, replaced by something cleaner, focus. By the time I reached the last page, my breathing was slow, deliberate. I backed up each photo to the cloud, checked twice that they uploaded, and slipped the papers back exactly as I found them. When I closed the drawer, I noticed a small key ring on the desk. One of the keys had a red tag marked deposit box. I didn't take it. Not yet. She'd notice. The air felt colder when I stepped back into the hallway. My reflection caught in the dark window, and for a second, I didn't recognize myself. The girl who used to crave her mother's approval was gone. This version of me didn't need permission anymore. I sat at the kitchen counter and composed a message. No greeting, no explanation, just the photos. Then I attached them and typed one sentence. You were right to trust me. I hesitated before pressing send. My thumb hovered over the screen as I listened for any movement upstairs. Nothing. Only silence and the faint hum of her world, perfectly undisturbed. When I finally hit send, it felt like the room exhaled with me. The message went out to my grandfather's phone, the little blue checkmark glowing like a promise. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere above me, my mother was sleeping peacefully, unaware that her carefully built world was already cracking. The woman who once told me, "You don't understand how family works," was about to learn I understood it better than she ever imagined. I turned off the lamp, leaving the study in darkness, and whispered to myself, now it's your turn to wake up. When Grandpa called that morning, his voice carried a tremor I'd never heard before. Emily, he said quietly, you need to come over. There's something in the attic I want you to see. He didn't explain, but I heard the weight in his tone, the kind that comes when truth finally claws its way out of the dark. I drove over with my stomach tight, every turn of the road feeling like a countdown. His house smelled like dust and memory, the way it always did. He met me at the door, his hands shaking a little as he handed me a flashlight. Up there, he said, behind the old trunk. His eyes wouldn't meet mine. I thought I'd burned all the old drafts years ago, but this one survived. The attic stairs creaked beneath my feet, every step releasing the smell of cedar and old paper. I swept the light across boxes and faded furniture, until it caught the corner of a yellowed envelope wedged between two boards. It was thick, sealed, and marked in my grandfather's handwriting, to be opened only by Emily Rashford. For a long moment, I just stared at it, my name in his handwriting, firm, deliberate. I sat on the floor and opened it carefully, the paper brittle under my fingers. Inside was a folded document, written entirely by hand. It started simply, I, Charles F. Rashford, being of sound mind and body, leave my farm, savings, and personal effects to my granddaughter, Emily Rashford, whose loyalty has never wavered. My breath caught, my hands went cold. Every line was written in that same careful penmanship, every word a quiet act of faith. My throat tightened as I read on. I trust her to care for this land and preserve the family's name with honesty, the one virtue still worth something. I couldn't move for a moment. The light from the small attic window caught the edge of the paper, and I saw my reflection in the glass, the same woman my mother called a burden, a disappointment, an outsider. And yet here, in my grandfather's own hand, was proof that I was never invisible. I'd been seen all along. When I went back down, Grandpa was sitting at the kitchen table with 2 mugs of coffee. He didn't look surprised when I placed the document in front of him. He just nodded slowly and whispered, I knew she'd changed something. I didn't know how far she'd gone. I took a deep breath. This is the original, isn't it? He reached out, tracing the edge of the paper like it was something sacred. Yes, I wrote this a year before I got sick. She told me she'd file it with the lawyer. I trusted her. His voice cracked on the last word. She forged the revision, I said softly. His eyes met mine, full of guilt that wasn't his to carry. And you still came back for me, he said. I never left, I replied. We sat there for a while, neither of us speaking. The clock ticked. The world outside went on like nothing had changed, but everything had. I realized that trust, the thing my mother had always used as currency, meant something entirely different when it was given freely. He reached across the table, his hand resting over mine. You've always been the only one who told the truth, even when it hurt. I nodded, though my chest felt heavy. The truth's all I have left. He smiled faintly. Then maybe that's enough. His faith in me wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, steady, the kind that fills a wound without reopening it. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged somewhere, even if that place was just one kitchen table, one man's belief. As I folded the will back into its envelope, I thought about what it would cost to bring it forward, what it would destroy. My family had already broken me once, but this time, I wasn't a child waiting to be accepted. I was a woman standing at the edge of truth. I looked at Grandpa and asked, what do we do now? He met my gaze and said, we do what's right. That night, as I sat in my car outside his house, the will safe in my bag, a thought lingered in my mind, sharp and steady. Would you tell the truth even if it meant destroying what little family you had left? Before I could answer it, my phone buzzed. My mother's name lit up the screen. I stared at it, feeling the cold air seep through the window. Then I picked up. Her voice was tight, furious, like glass under pressure. You've been in his attic, haven't you? I didn't say a word. She exhaled sharply, the sound half a warning, half a threat. You don't know what you've started. I smiled to myself, calm and certain. Actually, I said quietly, I think I do. ChatGPT said, her glass was still raised when I said, before you finish that toast, Mom, I think everyone should hear something first. The room went still. Only the faint hum of the speakers filled the silence. I reached into my purse, my hand steady now, and pressed play. Her voice echoed through the living room, calm, confident, familiar. Daniel, just make sure the papers look legitimate. He'll never notice the difference. A few gasps rippled through the crowd. The sound of clinking glasses stopped. Her tone on the recording continued, smooth as ice. Once Emily's name is gone, we can finalize everything. No one will question it. I didn't move. I just watched her face as the words circled back at her, louder than the music, louder than her practiced charm. Color drained from her cheeks. "That's not," she started, but her voice cracked halfway through the sentence. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. Daniel froze, staring at the floor like the wood might swallow him. My mother's fingers trembled around her glass until it slipped, shattering against the hardwood. The sound cut through the silence like lightning. My chest felt strangely light. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to explain. Every person in that room could hear the truth in her own voice. My mother's smile, that perfect, polished mask, shattered right along with the glass at her feet. Grandpa pushed himself up slowly from his chair. The hush was so complete I could hear his breathing. He looked at her, then at me, and said quietly, "I wondered when the truth would walk through that door." No one spoke after that. The music had stopped, but the recording still played faintly, her last words looping like a confession that refused to die. My mother's lips parted, but nothing came out. Her knees buckled slightly as she sank into her chair, eyes unfocused, mouth still moving without sound. I stood there, calm, watching the woman who once called me ungrateful finally meet the mirror she'd spent her life avoiding. The house was quiet the next morning, the kind of quiet that follows a storm when everything broken has already hit the ground. The guests were gone, the decorations half torn down, and the sound of last night's truth still echoed through every room. My mother hadn't come downstairs. She hadn't spoken to anyone. Her bedroom door stayed closed, and I didn't care to open it. Grandpa sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee, the same cup he'd used for as long as I could remember. His eyes looked softer now, but older too, like someone who'd carried too much for too long. When I walked in, he looked up and said, "You didn't have to do it that way." I sat across from him. It was the only way she'd ever listen. He nodded slowly. "She listened, all right. Whether she'll learn from it, that's another matter." He reached for the old leather checkbook he kept by the sugar bowl and placed it in front of me. "Take what's yours, Emily. Everything she tried to take from you, I want you to have it." For a second, I didn't move. The checkbook looked heavy, even though I knew it wasn't. It carried years of sweat, decisions, land payments, and love, all the things money could never really measure. "I don't want her leftovers," I said quietly. "I don't want to become her." He frowned. "This isn't her money. It's mine, and I'm giving it to you." I met his eyes. "Then let me do something better with it." He leaned back. "Better?" I took a deep breath. "I want to restore the farm, the way it was when Grandma was alive, with the orchard, the greenhouse, and the kids from the orphan fund coming in on weekends again. You used to tell me those days made you happiest." He stared at me for a long moment, then exhaled through his nose. "You sound like her, your grandmother." I smiled faintly. That's the best thing anyone's ever said to me. The morning light came through the window, landing across the checkbook between us. I opened it, not to take, but to write. My hands didn't tremble as I signed the donation line, half for the farm restoration, half for the local orphan fund my mother used to call a waste of time. It felt right, clean, like setting down something I'd been carrying my whole life. When I slid the checkbook back to him, he didn't stop me. He just looked at the number and nodded once. "You really don't want any of it?" "I already got what I needed," I said. "The truth." He reached across the table, his hand warm over mine. "You're stronger than I ever was." I shook my head. "No, you just believed in me long enough for me to remember who I was." Outside, I could hear the wind move through the trees, steady, almost forgiving. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to fight. I just felt done, free, in a way my mother never would be. Later that afternoon, as I packed my things, I noticed her car wasn't in the driveway. Her closet door upstairs was open, hangers empty, the scent of her perfume still faint in the air. Clara said she left early, no note, no apology, just silence. I didn't ask where she went. Some people run not because they're chased, but because they can't stand the sight of what they've become. I stood by the window, looking out at the fields, the same land she once called dead weight. It looked alive again, touched by sunlight and possibility. I thought of the children who'd play there soon, the hands that would plant and water and laugh. Something good would grow from everything she'd destroyed. Grandpa came up behind me, his voice low. "She'll never come back." I nodded. She doesn't need to. Some people lose everything before they realize they were the problem. He was quiet for a long time before saying, "You did the right thing." Maybe I did. Or maybe I just didn't want revenge to become another version of her cruelty. Either way, I felt lighter walking out of that house than I ever had walking in. I closed the door gently behind me and whispered, "It's over." It came on a gray morning, the kind that smelled like rain before it began to fall. I found the envelope wedged between the bills. No return address, no name, just my own written across the front in handwriting I hadn't seen in weeks. Familiar, careful, almost trembling. I knew before I even opened it. There are certain strokes, certain curves of a letter that only a mother can write. I stood by the kitchen counter for a while, holding it, trying to decide whether to tear it open or throw it away. Curiosity is a strange thing. It doesn't always come from hope. Sometimes it comes from the need to confirm what we already know. I slid a finger beneath the seal and unfolded the paper. There were only 3 words. "I see you now." That was it. No apology, no explanation, no mention of the lies, the forged signature, the years of quiet cruelty. Just a single line written in her elegant, practiced hand. The same hand that used to sign permission slips, write birthday cards, and erase my name from her world, one decision at a time. For a long time, I just stared at it. The ink had smudged slightly, maybe from her shaking hand, or maybe from a tear. I'll never know. But it didn't matter. Those words, small as they were, felt heavier than all the silence that came before them. I folded the letter once, neatly, and set it down on the counter. No anger came, no satisfaction either, just stillness. Maybe that's what peace really is. Not forgiveness, not victory, just the quiet understanding that some things are finally over. Grandpa was out in the yard tending to the greenhouse. He'd been rebuilding it piece by piece since the restoration began. I watched him through the window, his back slightly bent but steady, his movements sure. That greenhouse had always been his symbol of hope. Mine was this moment, standing here, holding proof that she saw what she'd done, even if too late. When I stepped outside, the wind carried the faint scent of soil and rain. He looked up and smiled. "Mail?" he asked. "Just a letter," I said. "Good or bad?" I shrugged. "Neither, just honest." He nodded, not asking more. Some truths don't need to be spoken twice. We worked in silence for a while, watering young plants, tying new vines to the wooden posts. Each small task grounded me, pulling me further from the person I used to be, the one who begged to be noticed, the one who mistook absence for punishment instead of choice. Later, when the rain started, I went back inside and picked up the letter again. I ran my thumb over the words one last time before tucking it into a drawer, not as a keepsake, but as a reminder. There was a time when those 3 words would have broken me, when I would have believed they meant healing or love or reunion. Now I understood better. Sometimes people only see you once you stop needing them to. Sometimes seeing is too little, too late. I thought about writing back, about saying something like, "I see you too." But that would have been a lie. I didn't see her anymore, not the woman she wanted to be, nor the one she pretended was still in control. I saw only what was left behind, a hollow silence where love should have lived. As the rain drummed gently against the roof, I whispered the question that had been circling my mind all day. Is forgiveness ever owed? The sound of it disappeared into the empty room. I didn't know the answer. Maybe it changes with time. Maybe forgiveness is something you give quietly, not for them, but to yourself. The moment you stop waiting for an apology that never comes. The wind rattled the window pane once more, and I smiled faintly. Whatever forgiveness meant, I knew I was already free. The grass was damp beneath my shoes, the kind that bends but never breaks. The sky was a pale silver, soft and quiet, like it had learned how to listen. I stood there for a long time before I spoke. "Hi, Dad," I said. My voice came out steady, almost peaceful. "It's been a while, I know." The wind moved through the trees, gentle and slow. I could almost hear him laughing the way he used to when I was a kid, telling me not to take things so seriously. I smiled at that. "You'd probably say I made too much of it all," I murmured. "But I think you'd understand why I had to." For the first time, there was no bitterness in my chest, no weight pressing behind my ribs. "I thought peace would come from winning," I said softly. "But it came from letting go." I brushed my fingers over the headstone, tracing his name. "You'd like Grandpa's garden now. It's coming back to life, just like everything else." The air carried the faint smell of rain. I tilted my head back, looking at the gray sky, and whispered, "I'm okay, Dad. Really." And I meant it. A faint ache settled in my heart. Not sorrow, just awareness. I'd built something steady from all that wreckage. And for the first time, I felt proud of it. As I turned to leave, my phone buzzed with a message from Grandpa's nurse. "He's resting more lately," it said. "You might want to visit soon." I closed my eyes, took a slow breath, and whispered, "I'll be there." The wind stirred again, as if carrying the promise back toward home. The letter came a week after the funeral, folded neatly inside an envelope that smelled faintly of old paper and cedar. Grandpa's handwriting filled the front, careful, deliberate, like he'd taken his time with every stroke. My hands shook as I opened it, the paper soft from age. Inside was a single page and the deed to the farm, bound together with a thin strip of twine. The first line read, "You taught me what honesty looks like." I sat down at the kitchen table, the same one where he used to pour his morning coffee, and let the words sink in. He must have written it weeks before he passed. "You didn't need to fight for what was already yours," it continued, "but I know you had to. Not for the land, for your name." Tears blurred the ink for a moment, but I wiped them away gently. His words felt steady, grounded, like his voice still echoing through the farmhouse. "I've lived long enough to see lies wear themselves out. Truth doesn't shout, Emily. It stands still until people come back to it." I could almost hear him saying it, the way he always did. Calm, certain, leaving no room for argument. At the bottom, in his slanted scrawl, he'd added one more line. "The farm is yours now. Make it honest again." I ran my fingers over the signature. It wasn't about money. It was about restoration, of land, of love, of peace. Outside, the late autumn light washed over the fields. The soil looked dark and alive again, the same ground I was once told I didn't belong on. I stepped out onto the porch, holding the deed close to my chest. "I'll make you proud," I whispered. The air was still, almost listening. In that silence, I thought about everything it took to get here. The lies, the forgiveness I never gave, the freedom I finally did. I smiled through the ache. If you've ever been through something like this, know that peace is the greatest revenge. Thank you for staying with me. And if my story touched you, I'd love for you to stay for the next one. The wind lifted just enough to rustle the leaves along the fence line, and I looked out across the fields, the same place I once wasn't allowed to enter. Now, it was mine. The wind moved softly across the field, carrying the faint scent of earth and leaves. The sky was gold at the edges, fading into gray, the kind of light that makes everything look honest. My boots pressed against the soil, steady, each step quiet. The land stretched wide before me, mine now, but more than that, free of the voices that used to fill it with bitterness. I let the air fill my lungs and whispered to myself, when they shut the door on me that night, I thought I lost my family. I stopped, looking out across the trees swaying in the breeze. Turns out, I only lost the noise. The wind picked up, brushing my hair across my face. I smiled, slow and certain. The peace I once begged for had been here all along, waiting in the silence, waiting for me to finally listen.